Welcome to the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast, where you can take a deep dive to explore the pitfalls and potential of the obsessive-compulsive personality, offering hope and help for perfectionists, workaholics, micromanagers, type A personality, and control freaks. Hello, everyone. Gary Trosclair here, psychotherapist, Jungian psychoanalyst, and author of the Healthy Compulsive Project book, blog, and podcast. There are, both among us and within us, young souls and old souls. Some of them are fulfilled, and some of them are unfulfilled. Typically, people with obsessive-compulsive personality traits are old souls, and they can express that part of them in either constructive or destructive ways. But usually, their young soul is silenced. The old soul is one manifestation of the archetype of the Senex, or the old man. Traits such as wisdom, caution, recognition of rules and boundaries, order, and stability are typical of this archetype. In his less fulfilling manifestations, he becomes rigid, judgmental, constricted, and he represses expression of his young soul, the archetype of the Puer. In healthier manifestation, he's the wise old man who we can call on to guide us in difficult situations. In this episode, we'll get to know the Senex and his younger counterpart, the Puer, to see how they affect us and how we can live their calling in more fulfilling and effective ways. We'll talk about why you should bother with this crazy idea of archetypes at all. We'll also follow 4 siblings from the Elderwood family to see how these archetypes can affect our path in life. But first, I haven't plugged my book in a while, so I want to encourage those of you who have not gotten it yet to check out my book, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder and Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. The book can serve as a great foundation to help you get the most out of this podcast. It can get you more balanced, and it will help you to use all those compulsive traits in a much more fulfilling way. Meanwhile, join me for episode 112 of the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast. Break free from the shoulds, how old soul and young soul archetypes can run your life. Act your age. It's a command we usually aim at brats who want to stay brats rather than growing up and owning up to their responsibility as reasonable citizens. But the command to act your age can also be aimed at the people who grew up way too fast and own up to far more than their fair share of responsibility. People who have an outsized commitment to rules and shoulds. There are a lot of people running around, shuffling around, who act like they're much older than they really are, and that's a waste of years. You may naturally be a young soul or an old soul, but circumstances may lead you to lean into that part of you so much that it hurts. The reason I'm bringing this to your attention is that a lot of you who listen to this podcast fall into the acting as if you're older category. You're acting not just like an old soul, but like an old man, and everything is about what you should do, even if you're a young woman. And a lot of those who listen to this podcast miss out on the possibilities of a more youthful approach to life, even if you are actually advanced in years. But it's not too late to get a little of that back. Here are just a few indications you're an old soul. You were very mature for your age as a child, rather than wild, adventurous, or carefree. You're far more disciplined and controlled than spontaneous and creative. You're more practical, risk-averse, and serious than your peers. Reflection is natural for you. You like to share what you've learned from what you've been through. You've probably been through more struggles than most people. And you think more in terms of what you should do than what you want to do. This can be natural and authentic, but too often these traits turn rigid and destructive. Understanding your personality through this lens can be helpful in achieving wholeness and balance, though it may be uncomfortable at first. So now let's talk about archetypes and why you need to understand them. Whether you are acting your age depends a lot on how you've integrated 2 particular archetypes. Archetypes are like apps or software programs. We can plug into them when we need to achieve certain goals. No woman would be able to raise a child without the archetype of the mother. No fireman could do his job without the archetype of the hero. Like certain software programs, archetypes can affect our entire approach to life, or at least a wide swath of it. They can be very helpful, or they can be like malware that freezes up your psychic computer. We don't always make conscious choices about whether or not we plug into software programs or archetypes. Sometimes archetypes come installed on your psychic computer, and you're stuck with them until you deliberately remove them, or learn how to use them. Archetypes are universal patterns of experience and behavior that evolved over time because they gave us some adaptive advantage. But as modern folk, we can be energized or paralyzed by old versions of archetypes. They can function as grooves or ruts. I find it helpful to know whether I'm in a groove or a rut. If I'm mindful of my finances, for instance, I'm solvent and I can afford a new iPad, I'm in a groove. If I check my checking account 3 times a day, I'm in a rut. If I'm able to bring awareness to the archetypal app I'm using, it's more likely I'll be in a groove than a rut. A good software engineer can look beneath the surface to see if a program or an app is running on our computer without our awareness. A well-adapted human learns to do the same for their own psychology. So today we're going to explore the archetype which, not well managed, can drive us to be prematurely old, the Senex, that's spelled S-E-N-E-X, which is Latin for old man. We'll also get to know his counterpart and sometimes archenemy, the Puer, which is spelled P-U-E-R, and which is Latin for young man. I'm sure you'll recognize them once I point them out. Question is, are they behind the wheel, or are you? Typically, we have more of one of these programs than the other. We can all benefit from cultivating both and helping them to get along. While I am enlarging their differences to show texture, we usually express them on a spectrum, and ideally they work together. While these terms unfortunately drag along millennia of sexism, they can apply to females as well. I'm going to list and compare the two archetypes. Try to notice which side you are more aligned with. 2 caveats to head off some confusion at the pass. Many compulsives have a conflict between conformity and autonomy, and they can feel both. The push for autonomy is often a reaction to their conformity. You can hear more about that in episode 43 of the Healthy Compulsive Project podcast. The other caveat is that you may have some traits of both, and that's not bad. So now I'm going to go through a list talking about qualities of the Puer first, and then of the Senex. So the Puer is spontaneous, immediate, and present. The Senex is planned and careful about future, reflects, he contemplates, and he's cautious. The Puer is rebellious. He questions authority and challenges tradition. He says, won't. The Senex is conservative. He upholds tradition and respects authority. That's not necessarily conservative in the political sense that we usually think of it. And he usually says, should. The Puer expands. The Senex contracts. He sets tight boundaries and limits. The Puer is free. The Senex is disciplined and rule-bound. He follows shoulds. The Puer creates and appreciates chaos. The Senex seeks order. The Puer wanders. The Senex is committed, grounded, and goal-directed. The Puer moves forward. He creates, renews, and invents. The Senex holds steady. He maintains continuity and memory. The Puer is idealistic. The Senex is practical. Puer uses imagination, whereas the Senex is bound to reality. The Puer takes chances, while the Senex is usually risk-averse. The Puer is excitable. He uses humor and plays. The Senex is serious. The Puer says yes. The Senex often says no. As you probably noticed, they both have important roles to play. Now we're going to talk about the compulsive Senex, whether it's a wise old man or a grumpy old man. The Senex is one of a few archetypes that describe the obsessive-compulsive personality. It can be expressed in a positive or a negative way. Many who are on the unhealthy end of the obsessive-compulsive personality spectrum might as well be old men. We like to think of ourselves as wise old men, but it's likely that we're considered stodgy and rigid. The grumpy old man is too cynical to be taken seriously. He can manifest in a shadow or negative form if our underlying motivations are overly self-centered, if the Senex's attributes are used in an attempt to prove ourselves, or if we are exclusively identified with the archetype. The negative manifestations of the Senex may be inflated if it takes its role in the world too seriously. Still, the Senex represents an aspect of our personality that is essential to wholeness, balance, and authentic expression. In its healthy manifestation, the Senex is like the wise old man. I'm now going to compare the unhealthy Senex with the healthy Senex, the different expressions of the archetype. First of all, the unhealthy Senex tends to be dominating, devouring, coercive, authoritarian, and tyrannical, whereas the healthy Senex mentors, initiates, and guides. The unhealthy Senex is rigid and closed-minded. The healthy Senex embraces structure, discipline, and order, contemplates, reflects, and is detached in a healthy way. The unhealthy Senex tends to be cynical, whereas the healthy Senex tends to be open-minded and philosophical about whichever way things go. The unhealthy Senex is dogmatic and controlling. The healthy Senex stabilizes, perseveres, has stamina, and endures. The unhealthy Senex is moralistic. The healthy Senex takes responsibility and has moral authority. The unhealthy Senex is judgmental, critical, and punishing, while the healthy Senex has wisdom and sound judgment. And finally, the unhealthy Senex overemphasizes limitations, and the healthy Senex points out possible limitations. Notice that in each of these comparisons, the unhealthy version of the Senex uses these traits habitually, whereas the healthy version uses them selectively. Let's talk about some examples of the Senex now. For example, think about Yoda, the Jedi Master from Star Wars, who lived to be 900 years old. His 900 years of experience taught him a thing or two, and he was capable of extraordinary feats. His strength, wisdom, and integrity won him the respect of the entire Jedi community. He encouraged other Jedi heroes to use their connection to the Force for good. Perhaps more importantly, in being a wise old man or a healthy Senex, Yoda was willing to look at his own dark side and let go of his previous attachments. He used his traits selectively rather than habitually. If you're more of a Harry Potter fan, think of Dumbledore as an example of a positive Senex figure. Examples of the grumpy or unhealthy Senex includes Ebenezer Scrooge from A Christmas Carol, or Professor Umbridge from Harry Potter, and Nurse Ratched from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. For some examples of how the Senex and Puer can look in our own time, we'll follow the 4 siblings from the Elderwood family. Now, the family was poor, and the parents were too overwhelmed to look after their children. The oldest of the children, Martha, had to take on responsibility quite early. This was probably what activated her Senex archetype so dramatically at such a young age. She was both mother and father to her siblings, since her mother and father were too distracted to do any parenting themselves. Martha wasn't going to take any chances of her younger siblings getting hurt, off track, or shamed by their stressed-out parents. To survive, she latched onto the idea that older was better. Older traditions, old ideas about how to do things, and cynical about new ways of doing things. Rules grew on her like barnacles. Rules about how to think, feel, and act. She considered her crotchetiness to be next to godliness. She knew what was right, and she had no reservations about instructing those who were not so well informed. But otherwise, she stayed above it all, above the fun and fondling and foolishness, far above the fools who weren't serious enough about life. When she reached 37, she was still like this, so she was already old at 37. She had mercilessly tried to keep her siblings on track, or at least her idea of being on track, with mixed results. Of her siblings, her sister became a conformer, and her 2 brothers both became rebels. Her friends, to the extent that she still had them, called her Grandma. In college, she was the one that always got them places on time, kept them out of trouble, and was the designated driver. But those relationships frayed with time, and she no longer spent much time with them. As far as she was concerned, they all needed a good long time out to think about what they were doing, what with all their faffing about and never getting serious. She excelled in her job as a project manager, but was failing at life, at least if you consider being happy any indication of success. Her life was filled with meaning, but no pleasure. She felt good about what she had accomplished at work and with two of her siblings, but she felt no joy at all. Life was one big rut of should. Martha's sister, Florence, was 5 years younger and the closest to Martha in temperament. While Florence was sometimes hurt by Martha's chastisements, she appreciated how much she cared about them and helped them. She did not need to react to Martha's tips, as Martha liked to call them, but these were really just ugly ultimatums. Florence was also cautious and conservative by nature, but it never turned rigid in her. She took the practical route of becoming a nurse and often felt fulfilled by the work. She married young and had children as soon as she finished college. She easily fell into the role of mother. One would not call Florence a Senex by any stretch of the imagination, but all of the characteristics of that archetype were well integrated. She absorbed any wisdom that came her way and lived by it. She had no need to challenge or question authority. Life wasn't easy, but she felt she had found her place, her calling. She had learned much from Martha, both about how to live and how not to live. If we consider a spectrum between Puer and Senex, Florence was on the mid-Senex side, with little need to express the creativity of the Puer. She enlisted Senex traits for the things that mattered to her, without identifying with them. The Puer is the archetype that expresses all that the Senex rejects, including freedom and creativity. The female version of this is the Puella. He or she feeds on spontaneity like a cup of strong coffee, and without it, you've got a grumpy, resentful, and petulant child on your hands. The ancients gave the Puer an additional qualifier in some cases, the Puer aeternus, meaning the eternal youth. Those people who won't grow up, discipline themselves, aren't serious enough, and are always wandering around rather than grounding themselves and building something. The Peter Pans of the world. Within the archetype of the Puer and Puella, we also have a wide spectrum from adaptive to maladaptive. They're not necessarily poorly adapted. They're often the creative ones, the ones who challenge outdated rules and move the world forward. They also know how to have a good time. Now I'm going to describe and compare the characteristics of the maladaptive and well-adaptive versions of the Puer and Puella. The unhealthy Puer habitually questions authority and dismisses it. The healthy Puer is judiciously challenging. The unhealthy Puer avoids responsibility. The healthy Puer takes responsibility for change. The unhealthy Puer can be very destructive. The healthy Puer is creative. The unhealthy Puer is a rebel without a cause, but the healthy Puer uses their energy for meaningful purposes. The unhealthy Puer is averse to settling down, whereas the healthy Puer is flexible and mobile, but not habitually so. And finally, the unhealthy Puer is impulsive, whereas the healthy Puer is spontaneous but not reckless. Again, notice how the healthy Puer uses these traits selectively rather than habitually. Now let's get back to the Elderwood family and see how the boys are doing. Peter is Martha's brother. He's 35 and plays drums in a rock and roll band. Well, sometimes, whenever they get together, which isn't often, to be honest. But he knows that any day now he'll make it big. Meanwhile, he gets by getting shifts as a barista, though his problems with authority make it hard to stay at any one job for very long. He's charming and he has no problem attracting women, but it doesn't seem to occur to him that a longer-term committed relationship could be more satisfying. Why tie himself down before his time has come? Besides, he's having lots of fun now. Or so he told himself. He too is actually in a rut, but one of automaton-like rebellion. He identified with the Puer archetype without knowing it, and that's a very limiting identity. He had watched his parents struggle to make a middle-class life, and struggled to keep their marriage together. That was not for him. Nor was Martha's cautious, conservative approach to life. In fact, with her sweeping control and limitless limits, she turned him off just as much as his parents' neglect had. On the other hand, Bill, who's 27 years old and the youngest of the siblings, dropped out of high school to work in video game design, and he designed a life game that worked for him. He, too, was a rebel, but he adapted well. He did not rebel automatically or dismiss any practical considerations as foolish. He led with creativity, but followed with reflection. When he came out and told his family about his boyfriend, they were both surprised and not surprised. He was always out of bounds as far as most of them were concerned. Martha did not approve. Peter was disinterested. Only Florence supported him. But Bill's natural joy, his large network of friends, and his satisfaction in the creativity of his work sustained him. He had discovered, as had Albert Einstein, that creativity is intelligence having fun. And, like his sister Florence, he had found his sweet spot and his calling. He knew what his creativity was for. Now we're going to talk about finding the meaning in the old soul and Senex. Jungian analyst James Hillman may have been the foremost contemporary expert on these characters. Hillman himself was a Puer who ended up going his own way, founding a very informal branch of depth psychology called archetypal psychology, an approach founded on connecting with and honoring the archetypes within us. Hillman encouraged us to remember that the word psychopathology meant the suffering of the soul. He emphasized that any psychic suffering is best understood not as a mental illness, but as a window onto what our souls want to manifest. We find meaning when we find our calling through our character, and when we live out that meaning consciously, even though, and especially if, it seems flawed. Our character may include strong elements of Senex or Puer. So, for instance, if my psychopathology is an obsessive-compulsive manifestation of the Senex, what does my soul want to manifest through that? Mentoring? Tradition? Safety? Fathering? It's not a symptom to be removed, but a calling to be answered, and it sours if I try to use it to impress others. Either our Puer or Senex side may serve an important purpose, a calling to benefit the larger world, and it may have meaning to lean into either archetype in that context. But in our personal psychology, ideally both are cultivated. Ideally they work together. If they are not both consciously developed, the neglected side falls into the hands of the shadow and is expressed thoughtlessly and recklessly. Imagine the destructive results of the escapades of a repressed priest, or the harm done by uninformed rants of the heedless rebel. Hillman advocated using imagination to cultivate both sides of the spectrum. He suggested that by using the process of active imagination, we could better know ourselves and our calling. This process is known today as parts work and involves creative dialogue with them. So let's now talk about achieving balance, what to do about all this. The Puer and Senex may be natural and authentic expressions of who we are and what we have to offer. Certainly there are old souls and young souls among us. Thank goodness for that. But living exclusively as either a Senex or a Puer does not work very well. They need each other. For example, consider Jem Stark, who was played by James Dean in the movie. He was the protagonist from Rebel Without a Cause. He had no Senex examples in his life for containment and guidance. He's impulsive, he rejects rules, and tries to prove himself with youthful bravado. But in the end, he seeks redemption by taking responsibility. On the other hand, Ebenezer Scrooge from Charles Dickens's Christmas Carol had no youthful Puer energy in his life at all, at least until the ghost of past, present, and future showed him where he was headed and what he was missing. Then he changed his ways. Identifying exclusively with Puer or Senex could also serve as an avoidance of risk or of responsibility. And trying to use the traits of either one to prove ourselves to the world is a betrayal of that part of us. Now I'm going to go through 5 broad suggestions to help you find a better balance between these parts of yourself. First, cultivate awareness of both archetypes. Are either the Senex or the Puer a dominant force in your life? For instance, is the Senex overly serious, overly responsible, overly controlling? Is your Puer side impulsive, habitually defiant, or does it have trouble with the authority? 2. Understand what function they have served for you, whether that's positive or negative. Have you had to identify with one or the other? For instance, with the Senex, was that needed to facilitate responsibility, to make you feel safe, or to help you achieve your goals? In the case of the Puer, was it helpful in declaring independence, or protecting your autonomy, or inspiring your creativity? And has it felt natural or reactive to be this way? 3. Acknowledge the effects of these archetypes. Has either archetype helped you to move toward that which is important to you, or has it caused suffering? Identify the specific ways it has affected you. For instance, in the case of the Senex, has it made you rule-bound? Has it made you criticize others? Has it made you miss out on sex, hugs, and rock and roll? In the case of the Puer, has it changed yourself with short-term thinking, or hurt others with impulsive behavior? Has it defied tradition or authority self-destructively? 4. Get to know your personal Senex and Puer. Name them. Just for instance, you might call your Senex your geezer, or your guardian, or your inner Yoda. In the case of Puer, you might call it your rebel, your inner provocateur, or your Peter Pan. Dialogue with them using imagination. What do they want from you? And what do you want from them? And 5. Integrate your neglected side. Name 3 ways your neglected side could help you achieve your goals. In the case of the Senex, perhaps form stable relationships, perhaps actualize your creative potential, or to be less impulsive. In the case of Puer, could it help you to be more relaxed, have more fun, or even get along with others? As you use your neglected side, try to remain aware of any uncomfortable feelings it brings up. Learn to be with these feelings rather than avoiding them. It's time to act your age, and it might actually be fun. You can find transcripts of this podcast with links to research sources and lots more at the Healthy Compulsive blog, www.thehealthycompulsive.com. If you'd like to subscribe to the Healthy Compulsive podcast, hit that subscribe button. And for a thorough guide to cultivating the positive potential of the compulsive personality, find my book on Amazon, The Healthy Compulsive, Healing Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder and Taking the Wheel of the Driven Personality. And if you find any of these helpful, let others know by leaving a review. Till next time, enjoy the drive.